What experiences have helped you prepare for the level of professionalism and leadership required of school board members?
Well, I think if you look at the information that I've provided to you about my whole career, I've had about 38 years in public education in all aspects of public education, both from at the Department of Education at the regulatory level and then at the local school district. In addition to that, when I was working on my education specialist degree, I interned with another superintendent at the Odessa School District, which was part of my requirement for that coursework. And I was able to do a lot of things in a much smaller school district than Lee Summit with her, and a lot of those were related to preparing information for their Board of Education in terms of they were going through a facility needs assessment and that kind of thing. So I really think everything that has happened my whole career, both my work experience and my education, have prepared me to really assist and be a good board member and be able to know what questions need to be asked.
Okay. What do you consider major challenges and priorities for the district, and how will you address?
Well, I would say there's probably 2 or 3 things that I would say are priorities and maybe challenges too. But I think priority-wise, I think our student achievement for all of our students is a priority. I believe that, this is my own personal opinion, but I believe we have some division in our community, in our school community at this point, and I think it's really important for us to get back all on the same page. I believe it's important for us to have that community of caring for our students, because that's one of the things through my research in one of my educational programs found that when students think their teachers and their community cares about them, they're more likely to stay in school and finish their course of instruction. So I think bringing our community back together is important. And I think the last thing probably goes back to the job that I did for the district for 28 years was to make sure we're being accountable and transparent. One of the things that I did, or I felt like in my role, it was part of my professional responsibility and personal responsibility when I was working for the district, was to make sure we were spending taxpayer money in the right ways. And we are exercising our due diligence with it.
Okay. What do you believe should be a primary focus of the school board, and why?
Well, I think the school board's primary responsibility is to hire and evaluate the superintendent. There are a lot of other things that I believe the school board's responsible for that are outlined in state law, in board policy. But the other thing I think is really important is that the school board represents the community in our school community concept, and I think they need to be very in touch with the community overall. But again, some of that goes back to if you create that caring community environment, that's kind of a natural thing that happens, because it's almost one whole community that wraps around itself and takes care of the community, the school, really the whole environment.
How does our district maintain and continue to improve its services and reputation?
Well, I think we have to have priorities, which should really drive the services that are provided, always with the students being foremost in our minds of what are we providing and are we meeting their needs across the spectrum. I think there's been a lot of conversations about that, and I think that's something we need to continue to do. But we have to identify what those are before we can really have a plan to address those. And what was the second part of that question?
How does the district maintain and continue to improve its services and reputation?
Well, I guess I'm a firm believer that your reputation, a lot of your reputation comes from what people see you doing and the way you act the way you behave, the way you interact with each other, your relationships. So I think that's the way that your reputation is impacted is by those things.
Okay. The R7 district bylaws clearly define the relationship between the school board and the R7 staff. Please describe how you envision your working relationship with staff.
Well, I think it's important for school board members to hear from staff. And if I were elected to the school board, I would continue that. I think the other thing that's important in that conversation is for when you're having conversations, one-off conversations with individuals, that they know that as an individual school board member, you really don't have any authority because you work as a body of seven members. So I think that's important too, but I still think you have to, to listen to people so that you understand where they're coming from. And it really, I think when you listen to other people, you get other people's perspectives, and it helps you be a better board member or person or whatever it might be.
Okay. You've already touched on this next question, but I'm going to ask it. Please summarize your qualifications and level of financial expertise appropriate to govern a $300 million school district.
Well, I would say I'm pretty familiar with doing that. You all may know from what I indicated, when I started out in the district, I had a fairly small staff and the budget was a lot smaller. And I worked very closely at that point in time with Dr. Davis. He's the person who hired me. And and really through the years, as the years evolved, I actually, took on more responsibilities and was given different titles throughout the course of the time. But really working on the budget has been since really pretty much day one of my employment in the district I've been involved in that. So I've seen it grow and evolve and been through some challenges in terms of budget reductions we've had to make, planning for bond planning activities, and then also other long-range budget planning activities as well.
Okay. What is your approach to conflict resolution among board members, and describe a time in which your mind was changed regarding an important issue?
Well, I think as school board members, you have to, number one, you have to sometimes agree to disagree, because I don't think that, this is, again, I'm going to say this is my personal opinion. I don't think we do any, I don't think I would be of service to someone if I just always go along with the group because that's what everybody wants to have, a 7-0 vote on things. I think it's important for, and again, this is me, it's important for me, if I'm elected, to represent the community and ask the questions that I think the community needs answers to. And I think those are some of the things that are important to me, and I think we can't always get everybody on the same page when you're talking about 7 different people who come from 7 different backgrounds, different experiences, etc. I do think, though, that it's important when the board does make a vote that whatever the decision is, then the board supports that decision. Does that answer that first part of that question? And the second part was?
Describe a time in which your mind was changed regarding an important issue.
Oh my goodness, there's so many. Well, I could probably give you a pretty basic example of that. Back, I think it was in 2008, we were preparing to implement a time and attendance system in the district. And we went through the process of trying to figure out how to set that system up. And we felt like at that time we could set the system up a certain way, but because we have 23 or 4 different locations, all doing something a little bit different in terms of their schedules, et cetera. We kind of went through a painful period of trying to evolve that into what would be the most workable for our staff. And so the process that we needed to do to set that system up, I had to take a completely different approach to in order that we could make that as least really confining and least cumbersome on our staff. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay.
And I answered that question.
With respect to LSR-7, please explain your understanding of other community resources in Lee Summit and how we best leverage.
I think we have a lot of resources in Lee Summit, all of the business community. There's lots of, and within the business community itself, there's a variety of resources in terms of things our students need, mental health resources, medical resource. There's lots of a wide variety. And so we're very fortunate in that regard. We have a large school district that's have lots of a wide range of businesses that can address really a lot of student needs that really kind of are outside the realm of the educational environment in terms of what happens in the classroom every day, but there are a lot of those resources students depend on. So I think there's a lot of that for our community. We also have, I think, a strong city, strong chamber of commerce, strong economic development, and all those things, while you don't on the outset don't look like that's really too much of a resource. It really is, because all of those things help generate the resources that are needed to support what happens in the classroom as well. So does that answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Define equity as it applies to our school district.
Well, in my opinion, equity is giving each student what they need.
Okay. In your opinion, what inequities, if any, exist within the school district?
Well, I'm sure there are inequities in the district. I do know from my own experience that there are students in some schools who need a greater level of resources than other students in other schools. And I think that's something that, throughout the time that I've spent in Lee Summit, part of our budgeting practice provided a per student allocation to all the school sites. It was a different per student allocation at elementary versus middle school versus high school, but yet each of the buildings across the board got the same kind of level or base, maybe is a good word to use, of resources. But I do think there are some students in some schools who need a different level of resources, and that's to supplement what that base amount. And you might be able to say that across the board, there's a lot of students who need a lot of different resources depending where they are in their educational and in their learning.
How would you address those inequities?
Well, I think we have to identify them first. And I think a very important part of that, identifying those, comes from being the building level principals and working in conjunction with their teachers and their site teams, knowing and being able to provide that information, as well as the school counselors, the varied amount of staff that work in the district now who have access to individual student needs, who could provide that information as well.
Okay. Recent data provided by our school district shows that free and reduced lunch students are underperforming in math, science, and other categories. The data goes on to break down this group into ethnic subsets such as African American, Hispanic, Caucasian, and Asian. How do you interpret this data, And how do you propose LSR-7 board address it?
Well, there again, when I look at the data, I would say that we have work to do for all of our students, every single student that is in this district. I would say that's what the data tells me. And I think the question of the achievement is not a new question. School districts have been wrestling with this question for years and years. Some school districts have been very successful in dealing with closing achievement gaps. There's a number of things. District leadership is important. Looking at the solution systemically is important. Looking at options. Early childhood education is important in this regard. Class size, school size is important in this regard. The possibility of extending school year is also a topic of discussion. So I think there's a number of things that have been tried and true. Technology is another thing in that umbrella. Technology in some research has been shown to help close the achievement gap. So I think there's some things we've already incorporated into our district, but I think there's other areas where we could have some additional work to do, collaborating with our teachers and our building principals to figure out what we can do to meet the needs of all of our students and improve the instruction and achievement of every student.
Okay. Our last question. What is your long-term vision for our district?
Well, I guess I think our long-term vision really kind of goes back to something I said earlier. I think it's really important for us to get back to that sense of community. And I told this story to someone I was talking to the other day, but I moved here in 1990. I grew up in the central part of Missouri in a little small town called Lynn, Missouri. And I lived there until I moved here in 1990. But one of the things that really was the motivation for me to move to Lee Summit is when I came to visit the district before I had the job interview or before I even accepted the position, I just came to the community and went to the grocery store, did a few of the things that I would do if I had lived here. And one of the things that struck me so plainly was the sense of community that was here and how everyone felt. I felt like I was welcome and supported from just that small amount of interaction. And I really think at this point we need to get back to being a cohesive school community. And until we do that, nothing else is going to matter.
Okay. Well, Judy, we flew through those. So you've got the floor to tell us anything else that you think we ought to hear.
Well, I don't know what else I can tell you, unless you all have any questions or need any follow-up or clarification to anything I provided to you. I guess I would say those of you that know me fairly well, and I think probably a couple of you know me fairly well, worked with me for a long time. I'm pretty a black and white person. There's not a lot of gray in my world, and it's probably because I've always worked in accounting and the finance part that, I'm pretty much that way. And I always look for win-win in situations. I like to take the time to analyze decisions that are being asked to be made, but I can make decisions quickly if I need to. And I'm always looking to do what's best for our students and staff. The other story I tell people is goes back to my days when I worked at the Department of Education. I had a variety of jobs there, but I used to travel all over the state. Go up to small little districts where the principal's office was in the boiler room to big districts like Lee Summit and Parkway in St. Louis. So I had a wide range of experience. And one of the things, and I tell people this all the time, is that from that experience, I can honestly and 100% say that our community, Lee Summit, has a great school district. Of course, we have work to do. But compared to a lot of other districts in this state, and there's a lot of districts in this state who cannot provide the resources to their kids that they need to get even sometimes basic education. We should be really proud of that, and we should strive to make it better. And that's what I would intend to do if I'm elected to the board.
Okay.